Hello and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Jason Knight, and each week I'll be speaking to some of the finest minds in tech and product, hearing a little bit about their stories, finding out what makes them tick, and hopefully learning a thing or two along the way. On tonight's episode, Kristy's Picks, we ask some important questions. What is a credit card product manager? What's it like working for product in a bank? Why is relationship building so important these days? Why do I mention salmon burgers in the intro and then never come back to it again? For answers to most of these questions and more, please join me on One Night in Product. So, my guest tonight is Kristy Olinger, a credit card product manager, virtual workshop facilitator, podcast host on The Opposite of Small Talk, and a passionate anti-salmon burger campaigner. How are you doing, Kristy?
I'm doing amazing. I can't wait for this conversation.
We'll come back to the salmon burgers if we have time, but I wanted to dig a bit into your work background to start with. So first things first, what is a credit card product manager and how do you feel your day?
Oh gosh. I mean, the more that I learn about different types of product managers, I'm going to say that we are, the stewards of our product. So very similar to a tech product manager or any other product manager. I think what makes credit card a little bit different is that it's tougher for us to be agile. So we've got regulators, it's a financial product. So that puts us in a spot where we can't always respond quite as quickly as some of you tech guys. So I'm the steward of the product. My job is to make sure that our customers have our card as their top of wallet choice. And that's what I do day in and day out.
Yeah, so that's interesting. I mean, I've worked with banks before in previous jobs, not directly for a bank, but definitely with banks, kind of doing research for banks and stuff like that. And I think what you said about the regulation just really chimes because I can imagine that it must be really tough. I mean, are there any kind of examples of things that you just could never do compared to, say, a tech product manager?
I mean, I don't know about never do. It's just, there's just such a scrutiny in the industry and it's for the right reasons, right? But it just seems that you have to be that much further ahead in your thinking because by the time you have an idea and then get it through all the governance to execute, you can't do it as quickly as you'd like ever. But it doesn't mean you can't be innovative. It just means you have to be multiple steps ahead of the curve. And I think we've had a couple good examples of being able to do that in my career, at least.
So you were at Bank of America for quite a long time.
Yeah.
Nearly 15 years by my count. Now, my last job before my current job was almost 19 years. So again, very long time at a very large company, different type of company. Mine was more of a market research firm, but still a very long time. And I guess the question that I get asked a lot, and the question I'm going to ask you now is, how did you manage to stick it out for nearly 15 years?
Well, so it's actually technically 19 years. So I worked at a company called MBNA.
It's not a competition, Kristy. It's not a competition.
No, I say because I was just shy of 20, which is hard to do. I loved my experience at Bank of America. I mean, just great culture, like really strong bank. I really liked the strategic direction. So very customer centric. And I loved the people that I worked for. I think I've got like corporate blood in my veins. Like I'm not like a rail against the rules kind of my pants kind of person. So I think I'm well suited for that corporate life. So that's probably how I stuck it out. Met some really great people, did some really awesome things. And it was a good time.
Was Bank of America quite an innovative firm, or was it kind of the type of firm that had a lot of really long-running products that you just had to keep maintaining?
Oh gosh, I mean, I'd have to say that the thing that attracted me to my current role is the innovation. So I was managing a product and processes that had existed for a long time. And much of what I did while I was there was kind of tweaking those things slightly to get a small amount of benefit, which when you multiply by the number of customers was a lot of benefit. But I came over to my current role at Citizens Bank really because it was an opportunity to build and be more innovative. That's really my only sort of I have this comparison point now that tells me that really the bank I'm with now is definitely more on the side of innovation.
Yeah, and Citizens Bank, I looked it up. It's obviously a smaller bank by far than Bank of America, but obviously that's a smaller bank, or that's smaller in banking terms, and that still leaves the bank with billions of dollars worth of assets. So it's in no way like a small sort of startup in the way that lots of tech companies would start out. I guess the question for me is, what does innovation look like in a bank, and how do you, for example, go out and talk to customers? I mean, obviously everyone has to talk to customers, and there are lots of things that I would assume that any tech company would do. But do you kind of go out and do lots of user research and sort of A/B testing with people and kind of tracking metrics like that? Or is there a very different approach for sort of banking and credit cards?
Yeah, I mean, I think the difference with large companies and banks is you don't have as much direct interaction with customers. So I'm very jealous when I hear product managers of smaller companies and tech companies talk about doing one-on-one customer interviews all the time. We do one-on-one interviews, but we're doing that through a research firm, right? So
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily doing the interviewing, although I have been on the other side of the two-sided glass on several focus groups, and that is just the most fun thing ever. So certainly have a hand in, what are the questions we want to ask, what are we hearing, and all of those kinds of things, but it's just not as direct as you would want it to be. The other thing with the bank that you do have access to, which is amazing, is a field of colleagues that are working in your branches. So they're interacting with customers every day. And so on a more anecdotal level, having conversations with colleagues about what they're hearing from customers becomes really helpful as well.
Right. So using the proxies that you can to get the information that you can, and then using that to inform your product decisions. So have you ever considered going into kind of tech product management at all, sort of working more with software and maybe working for like a really small kind of lean company, or does that not really appeal to you? I know you said earlier, for example, that you're quite keen on the kind of big corporate life. Have you ever considered sort of dabbling?
Well, I mean, I think even more than the corporate life, I like credit card. I think it's just fascinating customer behavior product, right? It's fascinating to understand why people choose one credit card over the next. Um, we've got lots of folks who don't even use credit cards, and how do you convert them? Like, I just think, I don't know. It's a really dynamic and interesting product with a lot of different levers. So it's held my attention for my entire career. So I can't imagine a transition like that. I could and I would. It's just not really on my radar because I'm enjoying what I do.
Well, yeah, and you also got lots of other kind of effectively side hustles that you do as well, which we'll talk about, which I guess also just sort of builds out the whole picture and maybe, without putting words in your mouth, maybe kind of satisfied some of the needs that you might get from sort of working for like a small urgent startup or something like that.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think everybody should have a side hustle.
Yeah, well, I've tried a couple, and obviously this being one of them, the other one being so far unsuccessful. But it's yeah, I definitely agree that just having anything to kind of sink your teeth into and just kind of round out your day-to-day life is definitely interesting and definitely something that I'd be trying to push for as I get older, which keeps happening. So one of these side hustles is facilitating virtual workshops and talking about communication and sort of related kind of business topics. I mean, how's that going, and how much of your time does that take up?
Yeah, so here's the thing. When I first started as a product manager, I really struggled with how to tell the story of my ideas. Like, it's just really complex, right? You've got customer input, you've got analytics, you've got the market, you've got the interests of the other stakeholders. There's just a lot that needs to go into anything that you're communicating to try to get buy-in. And so I found it really challenging in a good way. Like it was interesting and difficult. But what I found is that I'm not the only one that struggled with this. And it is like nobody really teaches you how to do it. You learn it by watching other people. Like, I don't know why they call them soft skills. It's the hardest thing that we do at work, right? So I've always been interested in communication and public speaking. For more than a decade, I've taught workshops and mentored folks on the topic because it's just, I don't know, it's just where I gravitate to. But more recently, I'm very focused on trying to help product managers because I feel like there's a little bit of a gap, right? Where, you've got entry level stuff that might tell you how to put together a PowerPoint presentation. Or if you're an executive, you might have a communications coach that's going to help you figure out how to position it to the board. But if you're just like me, you don't really have anyone that's showing you how to create a story around your work. So that's really what I've been focused on, and I've really been enjoying it. So I do these workshops kind of inside other companies, but I am in the process of launching a direct-to-consumer course so that people don't have to wait for their companies to bring me in.
One of the things that I think is really kind of really chimes with me in that is this whole kind of concept that there's a kind of a need for kind of almost continual mentoring throughout a career. And it's not just about, you start, you get your tools, you get your week's worth of training and then you go. It's like, there's so many points in a career which just, it's not quite the same as the Peter Principle because you're assuming that not everyone's kind of inept, but the basic point is that wherever you get to in your career, you're probably getting to a point where you haven't done it yet. And I think that there's this fallacy that once you get to a certain point, that person could just work it out. And I think that anything that people like yourself can do to actually try and help support people as they do move up the ladder is a really vital service, because the alternative is just trying to work it out, and that's no good for anyone because people aren't necessarily going to work it out on their own.
Right. Well, to add on to that, not only are you expected to work it out because of your level, your boss has too much on their plate for them to help you work it out, right? Mm-hmm. So that's where it does feel like you need, mentors or other kinds of skills training that can help with those advanced communication skills.
But also they're trying to work it out probably as well, because it's this fallacy that further up the pyramid that you go, that everyone's just okay. Yep. And I'm sure many people are okay, don't get me wrong. And I'm sure that many of these people's problems pale in comparison to other people's really real problems. But at the same time, it doesn't make it any easier day to day. So again, this whole kind of, I don't know if it's like, I don't know what it's like over in the US, but like this whole kind of like closed off, you can't admit weakness. You can't admit that you don't know how to do anything because, otherwise that's seen as a black mark against you or something like that. And that feels like a thing that really should change.
Well, and what's crazy is I am always that person that speaks up in a meeting when I don't know what the acronym is. What I've learned is that nobody knows what the acronym is, but nobody's saying anything because they think they're supposed to know. So I have no problem saying, what does that mean? Because otherwise we're all sitting around just not knowing what the answer is. That's not very effective or productive either. So I've never had a hard time throwing myself under the bus for not knowing things. And I think that should be something that everybody's comfortable with. But I agree. It's a thing over here too.
Yeah, I was going to say it should be okay not to know things because, everyone doesn't know something before they know it. And just because you didn't read a book or go to a particular meeting or, do a particular thing on your course, one of the things that again really chimes with me, and I think I've heard you mention as well, is kind of like about the growth mindset as well, and how it shouldn't be a problem to not know something. It's more of a problem if you just stop still. It's like not knowing something is a way of learning about that thing. It's not like a massive failure. You've not ruined anything by not knowing that. You've just given yourself and potentially your colleagues an opportunity to know something that they didn't know before, which I think is, we should all be going for that. Just continually trying to learn and kind of update what we do know.
100%. And, like I think about some of my like personal core values, and being a lifelong learner is at the very top of the list. And I'm 100%, I shouldn't say 100% growth mindset, because I will never dunk a basketball. Like that is, so I have a fixed mindset about my ability to dunk a basketball, but almost anything else, I'm totally cool with the fact that I'm like in a learning process and expect to be for the rest of my life. And I think you're right that the people who aren't willing to raise their hand and say, well, this isn't making sense, are the people who think that they should already know the answers. And that's not really how it works.
Yeah, there's that whole Dunning-Kruger effect where like the less you know about something, the more convinced you are that you do know about it. I hope that's the name of the effect. Otherwise, I'll have to edit that out.
I've heard that one. I feel like now I need to go research that one. I gotta say, so I'm only 1 year in at a new company, and I think I'm finally not allowed to use my newbie card. Like that was the best news, right? Like, hey, I haven't worked here for very long. I'm not really sure that I understand this. That's like the easiest way to make sure people are explaining things to you all the time.
Yeah, there's a certain kind of, I guess, amount of runway that you get when you land, but yeah, there is a point. Another thing that I've read about, the whole point about sometimes it's okay for it not to be your responsibility because you've just started, or you didn't get to that bit yet. But eventually, if you start a company and if you're the kind of leader of an area or leader of a team, eventually it's actually your problem and it's your responsibility, even if it happened from before you started. I think a lot of people that maybe operate in a fixed mindset, or maybe kind of come from companies that have had blame cultures and stuff, they're always trying to push the responsibility on something else. Whereas, again, the kind of, for me, almost an extension of the growth mindset is, well, actually, you got to own it. It's yours now. You fix it or you don't, but it's on you now. You may not have created the conditions that occurred, but it's now your job to fix it. And if you don't fix it, that's on you.
Wow. So I feel like what you said really just resonated with me. I told you this wasn't the best Monday I've ever had. Something happened, and I think just to not tell the details, but to tell you it was exactly that. It's something that I should have known based on my responsibilities, and I didn't, and I got a little bit blindsided. So I'll have to do a post-mortem and see what happened and how that happened. But yeah, I agree. We need more people to take responsibility no matter what.
Yeah, you got to own it. And we've also spoken before about how passionate you are about kind of promoting networking and relationship building. I don't know if that's just at work or more sort of socially and sort of social networking as well. How has networking helped you in your career?
Well, so first of all, I have to say, I always call it building relationships, because in networking, people literally like shrink away and they want to run. I think they're envisioning like a ballroom filled with, people that they don't really want to talk to and won't have any value in their in helping them to progress. Gosh, networking is everything. As a product manager, I feel like we're the caretaker of the product, and yet we don't have direct leadership over every person that's going to impact that product. So often we're leading through influence. And really, before you can influence someone, you have to understand them and get to know them better. So I feel like building relationships, I think sort of the first level is the people that you're, on your team, and then on the cross-functional teams that support your product has been the difference maker. Because when you can position a change that you're looking to make in the language that is meaningful to your stakeholders, it changes the game. All of a sudden, what you're saying makes sense. And I love, there's this word equifinality, which means that there's more than one way, there's more than one path to get to the same end. And that's what it's like to be a product manager. There's always more than one way to do something. Your job is to convince people that the way or the direction and the path that you're recommending is the right path. And when you're able to tie in the things that are important to all the different stakeholders to that story, then that your path becomes the clear winner. Just by virtue of how it's positioned. But for me, it all starts with, you can't do that if you don't know your stakeholders. So that's been the primary thing, just from a work perspective.
And what advice would you have for people? And I'll count myself amongst this number, certainly in the past. Maybe I'm a little better at it now. But what advice would you give people that maybe aren't very good at that, or don't know what to do, or maybe aren't even particularly motivated to do that?
Yes. Okay. So I have a free downloadable guide for how product managers can build relationships. If people go to KristyOllinger.com/build relationships, I walk through a 3-step guide for doing this. But I'm going to give you the highlights here. You're going to be really strategic about this. This guide takes you through this. You can actually assess where are your blind spots. So it walks you through how a little bit of a self-assessment for the different lines of business and how strong your relationships and your knowledge is in those lines of business. And then you can be more strategic. But my favorite way to do this is, and has been forever, even before the pandemic had us all virtual. My preferred method has been virtual coffees. So literally just scheduling 30 minutes with people, and no specific agenda. Really just an open dialogue. The whole key is to listen more than you speak. You should be listening 75% of the time, only speaking 25% of the time, and just asking open-ended questions. Like, tell me about yourself. What are what kinds of initiatives are getting prioritization in your organization right now? Who are the rising stars? What are the hot topics and pet projects of your leadership team? Like just open-ended, and even just on the personal front. Hey, what did you do this weekend? I think people discount that kind of chit chat because they feel like it's not work related. It's not driving towards a goal. But the more you can get to know someone, the more you can be empathetic and understand them and really sort of connect and build something together. So for me, I think, again, back to your question, which I'm assuming sort of leaned into, like, if you don't really like it and maybe you're kind of introverted and it's not really your thing, I think one-on-one networking is the best anyway. And most people are willing to have a conversation and talk about themselves. So, just not even just sending it as a planner and saying, hey, just looking to catch up.
Yeah, that reminds me of a couple of books, actually. One of the books was Radical Candor, which I'm sure you've probably read, talking about the importance of kind of getting to know people and then being honest with them. And frankly, also rewinding about 100 years to How to Make Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie.
I love that you mentioned that, because the guide that I just told you about, the downloadable guide, that book recommendation is in there.
Oh, there you go.
The book is 84 years old. It was published 84 years ago. How crazy is that? And it is so relevant.
Well, yeah, I mean, I read it, and it was 100% relevant and kind of interesting. All this thing about like the I can't remember the exact quote, but something along the lines of like the sweetest word in the English language is you, or something like that. And people love like people taking an interest in them. I do kind of in a way sort of read that book in a kind of 1930s film, like high pitched, really fast, kind of fast talking accent, like a detective or whatever, because it just feels like it's just written from that time. And some of the examples are kind of a bit funky for today's day and age. But I think that the core message is really sort of valid and important. And I know that he's got other books as well, which I'm looking forward to going through as well.
I mean, you aren't kidding. Like, talk about someone bringing ideas to life through storytelling. But when you're telling stories from 84 years ago, the misogyny and I have to ignore all the gender stereotypes that are in there. And yes, examples around, I don't know, horses and I don't know, whatever else. But Great book.
Yeah, no, it genuinely was. So you're also involved in podcasting, just like me, but been doing it for a little bit longer and a little bit more polished, and different type of show as well, called The Opposite of Small Talk. So I've had a listen to the first episode of that, and it's really good, and I found it really insightful. I think one of the things that really chimed with me on the first episode was about how lots of ideas aren't themselves original, but it can be original to you, and that the way that you effectively tell it can be original as well. And actually, that was one of the reasons why I started, thinking maybe it's a good idea to potentially do a podcast or to write some Medium articles, because end of the day, I can write about things that probably a dozen other people have written about, and I can speak about things that a dozen other people have spoken about. But if I can just find a different angle on it, even slightly, that makes it original for someone else and maybe helps them. But how did you get into podcasting in the first place?
Gosh, that's a good question. So my brother's been podcasting for years and years and years. He's in the financial advisory space. He does consulting work there. So it had been on and I love podcasts. I mean, I've been listening to podcasts long enough that I used to have to download them to my iPod Nano or some ridiculous version of that. So I can remember, so we're talking early 2000s there. So I've always been a podcast listener. And then last year, I felt this need to own something of my own, even though I was managing, a product, and in theory, I own that, but you never have 100% creative control over your product when it's part of a company, right? So I was feeling just sort of this need to own something. And a good friend of mine and we have that similar growth mindset. And we found that whenever we got together, we were always talking about, what podcasts are you listening to? What books are you reading? And, all of those kinds of things. And honestly, it was just a random text one day. I said, "Hey, we need a podcast." And so I have a co-host, and we love it. And similar to you, I mean, the topics that we cover are all self-development, whether they're business development or personal development, and they're not topics that we're not out there doing unique research or anything like that. But it's our interpretation and our experiences of whatever the topic is, and it's been amazing, and it's opened me up to the idea of networking outside of my company. Prior to a year ago, I'd never spent any time networking with people that weren't in my company. And boy, did I miss out. I would say I definitely should have been doing that sooner, because I've met a million interesting people such as yourself, but also just, I feel like it seems time consuming, but I think I have this abundance mindset, right? Where somehow things feed off of each other and snowball, and all of the things end up interconnecting and benefiting all of the things that you're working on. So it's been a wild ride for sure.
And again, I obviously agree, because I think that we've spoken about this before, and we kind of, I think, share some of the same broad feelings about stuff like this. But again, it is a different type of show. I mean, it's the two of you. Well, certainly the episodes I've listened to so far, like the two of you talking about a variety of topics that interest you, as you say, and kind of come at different angles. Is it something that you really plan minutely up front? Do you kind of pick your topics and agree it all in advance and then kind of execute a plan, or do you kind of just pick a vague theme and effectively wing it?
So we are very different people. We complement each other. I'm a planner. So I'm not going to wing anything. So we have a pipeline of potential topics and potential guests, and we do an outline for each episode. But it was really important to us that it not feel scripted. So the only thing that we script is the introduction of the guest, to make sure that we're including whatever they'd like us to promote or those kinds of things. But then outside of that, we try to make it very interactive and almost like a discussion, kind of like if we were out having a glass of wine together with this guest, because it just seems like the conversation is so much better that way when you can kind of take it wherever you want it to go, like we're doing here, versus having like a very specific set of questions that then feels a little bit ping-pongy. So that's our approach. It's been working for us so far, but it is weird when you have 3 people, because then it's a little bit of a like, but it seems to work out pretty well.
And I guess the critical question there as well is whether you actually do pour a glass of wine before you start to kind of get yourself into the mood, or whether whether it's a completely dry podcast.
Well, I definitely have in the past. I'm much more likely to have a pint of Ben and Jerry's American ice cream. I don't know if you know about that, but American Dream is like the best ice cream.
Yeah, I don't think we get that over here. We've probably got some kind of Brexit version instead, but
That's probably right. It's a good one.
Bulldog noses in it and stuff like that. Who knows? So one thing that we kind of caught up in advance of this call was you had a job at Blockbuster Video, and you mentioned that you used to have a shelf called Kristy's Picks. Now, what was Kristy's Picks shelf, and what was it doing at Blockbuster?
Well, so are there Blockbusters in London? Were there?
Yeah, well, not anymore. But we used to have a bunch of Blockbusters. I used to remember going as a kid up to the up to town and going and getting the films and putting it back in the letterbox and all that stuff. So yeah, we had them.
Okay, so I still have my name badge, which cracked me up. I had it saved for posterity. So Kristy's Picks, I decided I was going to pick one movie from each genre. So I wasn't going to have like all the same type of movie. I was going to pick a horror movie, a drama, a suspense, romance, whatever. So I'm going to share with you what I think was my best pick and what was my worst pick. And this is really going to date me, but I guess it is what it is. Everybody knows how old everybody is with social media. So my best pick, and you couldn't pick the new releases. So this was 98, I'm going to guess, 97 or 98. But the best pick was old enough that I could pick it, and it was Shawshank Redemption.
Great film.
Great film. My most embarrassing pick was my romantic comedy, which was Can't Buy Me Love, which I stand behind as my romantic comedy pick. I don't know if you've seen that one. It was a Patrick Dempsey. It was a pretty terrible movie, but I stand behind it anyway. It's classic.
I'm already coming up in hives thinking about the IMDb rating, to be honest, but I'll look it up. Maybe it'll be one for a rainy Sunday afternoon or something like that.
It's terrible. I'm sure it does not hold up.
And I understand also that you're not allowed to donate blood because you may have had mad cow disease, or you just think that you had mad cow disease.
That's what I'm told. Yeah, the Red Cross won't let me donate blood. They ask a question about whether or not you've lived overseas in Europe in the 80s. So I guess mad cow was a problem then. So because I lived in London for 5 years growing up, and we traveled a lot in Europe in the late 80s or mid to late 80s, they won't let me donate, which is a shame because I don't mind needles. I would definitely donate blood or platelets or whatever. But it's very possible that I could have mad cow disease, apparently.
I think you probably would have known by now, but
yeah.
It's funny because I can donate blood, but when I did donate blood once, I found out that I was AB positive, which is known as the universal receiver. So I can accept anyone's blood, but the only people that can accept my blood are people that have my blood type. So my blood will kill anyone else that doesn't have my blood type, but those people can equally receive anyone else's blood. So I'm like certainly my circulatory system is the most selfish, self-centered blood system that you can think of.
You are useless.
It's not the first time I've heard it either. And if you weren't doing this, what you're doing now, if you weren't a credit card product manager, as a day job at least, what would you be doing as a day job, do you think?
Oh gosh. I mean, maybe something in advertising. I don't know about you, but whenever I see the creative come back for any of our marketing campaigns, I always feel like I should copyright them. I'm always trying to make changes. So maybe I would go do that so that I could have control over the creative copy.
There you go. You can live the Mad Men dream.
Yes, I would love that. Only if I get to have a fully stocked bar in my office.
Well, exactly. I think, again, that's something that we should all aspire to. And one book recommendation for our listeners. I know that you read a lot of books, and you've obviously been talking about a lot of books on your show. What's like a top pick from recent past that you'd recommend?
So if you had asked me this before we had the conversation about how to win friends and influence people, that's what I would have directed you to. Since we already talked about that book, here's actually what I'm going to suggest. You actually don't even have to read the book. It's called The 4 Tendencies by Gretchen Rubin. And it's a personality framework that relates to what motivates people in terms of expectations. So are you internally motivated or externally motivated? And it helped me tremendously to understand some of the people that I work around. So here's sort of what it is at a really high level. So if you're an upholder, that means that you respond equally to an external expectation, like a work deadline, or an internal expectation, like a New Year's resolution. If you're an obliger, you can't keep a New Year's resolution, but if there's an external expectation, you'll meet it every time. If you're a questioner, you only meet expectations if you understand and believe in them. So you ask a lot of questions, right? Like you can't do something just because someone says to do it. You have to know why. So you can meet any expectation if you believe it. Or you could be a rebel, and rebels can't meet either. You can achieve stuff. I don't really understand how rebels work. It's apparently a very small percentage of the population. But this helped me tremendously because I had some questioners in my life and they were driving me nuts. Like they were making me really angry because whenever we would talk about things, they would never just do what we needed to do. They would always ask me a million questions, and I took it as like personal, like they were, combating the idea and, didn't want to do it, but it was more just like they needed to understand the why. Some people really need to understand the why in detail. Other people just need to know what the deadline is and they're going to go get it done. And it doesn't really matter to them what the why is. So anyway, the book is called The 4 Tendencies, but you can actually just go to gretchenrubin.com/quiz and you can see what your tendency is. And then you can start to just read a little bit and figure out who the people around you are.
Well, also, by the way, that was a fantastic summary. But also, I get the feeling that you've almost done a Blinkist on that book now, and we've kind of already read it, which is good. So
she came up with it. She has a book called Better Than Before, which is a book about habits, which is also an excellent book. And so there's a little bit of it in there. And then I think when she got a hold of, this is like a framework. And then she did the quiz and the other book, and it's pretty good. It's pretty helpful.
Cool, I'll check it out. Final question. Inspirational quote. Favorite inspirational quote for our listeners?
Yeah, so I'm a big Zig Ziglar fan. And one of his quotes is, you can get everything in life that you want if you'll just help enough other people get what they want. And I truly believe that. And it's not transactional in that way. It goes back to networking and relationship building. It's more like when you give of yourself to others, it always sort of circles back to you. It's not one-on-one. It's not transactional. You just put good things out in the world and then somehow good things come back. So you can get everything in life that you want if you will just help enough other people get what they want.
Excellent. That's definitely something we should all live by. And I also need to think about my favorite quote, but I can save that for someone else's podcast in case they doorstep me with that question.
Right? I pulled that one right out there.
You did. You did say you were a planner, though. So I'm assuming that.
Quotes. So I could have pulled out a couple different ones for you.
Well, it's been a great chat. Where can people get hold of you? Obviously, you've got your podcast, and is there anyone else that they can kind of hit you up after this for more of a chat? Or
so the podcast is on all the major platforms, The Opposite of Small Talk, as well as Facebook and Instagram, The Opposite of Small Talk. And then I'm at KristyOllinger.com. So you can find me there, and LinkedIn. I'm all over the place, man.
I'll ensure that the full breadth of your coverage is put into the notes of the show, so people can come and bother you and find out some of the other interesting things that you've got to say.
Great.
Well, that's been a fantastic chat, Kristy. Thanks very much for taking the time, and hopefully we can keep in touch.
Thanks, Jason. It was my pleasure.
Thanks for listening. As ever, it's my pleasure to have your attention. If you'd like to come onto the show to talk about your experiences, please feel free to pop to the website, onenightinproduct.com, click the link, leave your details, and we'll be in touch. Otherwise, of course, I'd appreciate it if you shared, followed, or liked this podcast on the app of your choice. Tell your friends about me, and please come back for more on One Night in Product.